Good evening, afternoon, or night to everybody following this channel. Today's transmission will be in English. We will continue today with the work we were doing on the book of Genesis. For those wanting to listen to this transmission in Spanish, down here is the link. Buenos días, tardes y noches a los que escuchen este video el día de hoy. Aquí abajo está el enlace para escuchar este mismo contenido en español, ya que hoy la transmisión será en inglés. Hoy estaremos continuando con la cobertura sobre el libro de Génesis en inglés. Quiero mandar saludos a la librería guadalupana Nuevo Amanecer, allá en el Anaheim Marketplace. Now, having said all this, let's begin our study of the book of Genesis. We have already seen, for example, that the book of Genesis is part of the Pentateuch, which in Hebrew is called the Torah. The book of Genesis, which in Hebrew is said Bereshit, means the beginning. Genesis is in Greek, Bereshit is in Hebrew, but they both mean the beginning. Let's continue with where we left off. We were about to read chapter 13. So let's move on. Let's go to chapter 13 and see what it has to say. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. I want to clarify one thing. There is confusion with the word Negev here. But for the proper interpretation of it, which is the word Negev, this version has it translated correctly. Other versions, like the King James, for example, notice here it says to the Negev. I want to show you exactly why the King James version is a terrible one to go from. Let's see how the King James version says this very same verse. Well, and Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot went with him to the south. You see, King James translates Negev to the south. This leads to very wrong interpretations, because look, it's saying that they left Egypt heading south in the King James version. Why is this a major mistake? Let's continue reading the rest of it to see why exactly it is wrong to interpret it as per the book of King James. And I'm saying the book of King James because it's not really a Bible. Sorry. King James is not a Bible. It is a mockery of the Bible, as I am right now showing you. He continues saying, Abraham had become very wealthy in livestock and silver and gold. In other words, he prospered while he was in Egypt. He continues saying, from the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier. Now, let's look at the map so we can understand what is going on. We're over here. Last we saw, Abraham had gone into Egypt. Now, according to the King James Version, he went south, as if he were following the Red Sea or the Nile River, whatever, what have you. But it is telling us he went to Bethel. Bethel and Ai are a place up here. So how could he have gone south when they were going to Bethel? So King James Version itself contradicts itself. It tells us he's going south, while at the same time he's telling us he's going to Bethel. You cannot get from Egypt to Bethel by heading south. However, the New International Version mentions that they were heading to Negev. Negev is a desert that was found in this area right here. So from Egypt, they went to Negev and then to Bethel. That makes a little more sense. The reason why some people fail to translate this correctly is because the word Negev, which is the name of the desert, also means south. We cannot deny that. But a proper translation looks at the context as well. And the King James Version only gets stuck with the words and fails to look at the context, the way many Protestant churches tend to do. So now we're seeing Abraham comes out of Egypt into the Negev and then up to Bethel, where he had set up his tent and his first altar. Now let's continue with the reading. Now you saw one of the reasons why I told you before I do not trust the King James Version. And where he had first built his altar, there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. So, okay, once again, Abraham leaves, arrives in Bethel, and calls on the name of the Lord. Notice that even though he is wealthy, he is not forgetting the name of the Lord, our God. Even though he still made a major mistake in Egypt, you can watch our coverage on Genesis 12 to see what his major mistake was. I'm not going to go into it right now because of time and because it doesn't go into this chapter anymore. But even though he made a major mistake in chapter 12, he still remembers God, and God still is and he still finds favor in God, as we are to see. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were no longer able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abraham's herds and Lot's. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land. Excuse me, I have to check something out here. How does this come out in the New American? Okay, so now we see that they're both getting rich. They're both getting wealthy. Abram and Lot they both prospered. Now they have a lot of herd. They have a lot of cattle. There's not enough room for them wherever they migrate to. So now the shepherds who take care of the herd for Abram and the shepherds who take care of the herds for Lot start having problems with each other. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abraham and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers." Now we see there are arguments or strife, maybe even some fistfights taking place between Lot's people and Abram's people. However, Abraham doesn't believe that things should be that way because, what does he say here? For we are brothers. Wait a minute. Are they brothers? We just remember that we saw in Genesis chapter 11 the family tree. And in the family tree, we just saw, what does it say here? In in chapter 11, verse 27. Now these are the records of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, Haran, and Haran became the father of Lot. Wait a minute. Lot is not Abram's brother. According to this, Lot is the son of Haran, who happens to be Abram's brother. So what does this mean? Lot is Abram's nephew. Now, wait, what's going on here? We could probably ask ourselves. So let's go and look into the actual Hebrew of it. Those who excuse me, not this one. Those who know me know that when I want to look at the actual languages of the Bible, I like to go to BibleHub.com because right there I can see the actual original way it was written. So we want to read it in Hebrew. We want to read Genesis chapter 12, verse 8. No, wait. Excuse me. Genesis 12, verse 8. Vayatek mishama hahara mikedem lebetel vayet ohelo betel miyama vahai mikedem vayaben sham mezwe liave vaikera sham yave. Okay, why is it saying 12? We're on the 13th. My mistake. Chapter 13, verse 8. Here we go. Vayomer Abram Elot. Al na tehi meriba bini ubinach ubin roicha. Ki anashim achim anachnu. Ki anashim achim. Brothers. Okay, even though this told us that that Abram is Lot's uncle, it is still telling us here that they are brothers. What is going on? Well, here is what's going on. In the Hebrew language, in biblical Hebrew, there is no word for other type of relatives. In Hebrew, in the biblical Hebrew culture, from the time of Abraham, even up until the time of Jesus, there were only three types of relationship recognized within Jewish culture. One of them was between an Abba and the Bain, or Bar, if you look at it in Aramaic, which is between father and son. The relationship between father and son extended up and down the lineage indefinitely. So you in biblical Hebrew, you would also call your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, your 26th great-grandfather, and so on, your father. Fatherhood was shared between the father, the grandfather, the great-grandfather, and so on. So in the same way, you would call your son, your grandson, your great-grandson, your great-great-grandson, and so on, you would call them your son. The second type of relationship recognized in Judaism is recognize the relationship between a husband and wife, which is the same in all cultures. And then the third type of relationship falls with everything else: brothers, cousins, relatives, uh, countrymen, um, colleagues, all those were identified with the word brother. So whenever you get to the word brother in a Jewish culture, should understand that it does not mean that they were literally brothers, but that they were related somehow. That's all that the word brother means in the Hebrew language, as I just demonstrated to you when we just saw verse 11. When we just saw chapter 11, he's telling us that Lot is Abram's nephew. Yet this chapter says that they're brothers because the word nephew does not exist in the Hebrew. Nephew is part of the types of relationship that falls within the everything else. So they would identify themselves as brothers just because they are related, not because they're really brothers. For this very same reason, when we look at the New Testament and we see the words brothers of Jesus, it does not mean that Mary had other kids. Remember, Abram and Jesus were pretty much the same culture, in which if you're not somebody's father's son or spouse, you were automatically their brother, regardless of how you fit in the family tree. So it is wrong to assume that Mary had other kids, even though the Bible does mention brothers of Jesus or brothers and sisters of Jesus. It is wrong to assume that Mary supposedly had other kids, because the word brothers in the Jewish culture does not imply that, as I have just now demonstrated. It is not the whole land before you. Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left. So, in order for things to go fine between the two relatives, Lot and Abraham, they're parting ways for their sanity. Lot lifted his eyes and saw that the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Of course, you had the Jordan River. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So he noticed that the valley of the Jordan was well watered. Of course, you have the what we call it, the river there. It is also telling us this was before Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, let's go back to the map. Um, and let's see what we're talking about. In the time of Abraham, the Dead Sea that we now see here did not exist. This Dead Sea did not exist. And we saw that they were up here in Bethel, up here, and you saw that this valley was well watered. Right now, the Jordan is much smaller, but in those times it was much wider. So Lot decided to head over here where it was well watered and there was more irrigation for his sheep. He did not have to struggle as much to find water as Abraham was doing. So he thought it was in his best interest to settle in the Jordan. So Lot gets to the Jordan, and then he tells us that he heads down to Zoar. The southern part of the Jordan, of the Dead Sea, did not exist in the time of Abram. And there's cities that are mentioned there, like Zoar, Sodom, and Gomorrah, were right in this area here. As a matter of fact, we can still find the uh, the mountain named for Sodoma, for Sodom, Mount Sodom, right here. Because Sodoma was in that area right there. It is believed that Gomorrah is, okay, even look here, Neve Zohar. You see there? Named after the island. Named after the cities there. So all those cities identified by those where Lot went to are right here in what has afterwards come to be known as the southern point of the Dead Sea. Having said this, let's continue with our reading. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated. We just saw that the Jordan Valley is to east of Bethel. So let's go back with our reading. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom, which I just showed you in the map where it is believed to have been. Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly evil and sinners against were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. And the Lord took Abram after Lot had separated from him. Okay, we see verse 13. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. This is preparing us for when we get to chapter 18 and 19. We will get there and see what later. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as of the dust of the earth, so that if anybody can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Notice, after the major mistake that Abram made when he went into Egypt, where the major mistake with his wife and with the Pharaoh, God is still promising Abram. Abram is still finds favor in the eyes of God to the point where he blesses him with a promise of making his descendants numerous. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. There he built an altar to the Lord. Now, before anything else, let's look at the map. They were up here in Bethel, up here, and he moved south to Hebron, to Mamre, where he set another tent, and like always, he built an altar to the Lord. He has already possessions, he's already rich, but yet he always remembers to praise God for whatever he does. Wherever he settles himself, he establishes an altar to communicate with God, to offer up into the Lord. The word for altar is mizbeach, which literally means a place of offering, because wherever he went, he would offer a calf up unto the Lord in thanksgiving. Like always, long live Christ the King!